There we go, chat. That went really well, I think. Oh, you guys got an ad? Oh, Lamau. I'm going to take a few minutes and talk about it, and then I want to react to a lot of the things he said because I didn't really get a chance to answer them. Okay, I want to watch this interview now. Oh, and I said this earlier. This also goes for reacting. I mentioned this at the start of the interview, and I tweeted it, but I need you all to know if you guys are trying to restream or co-stream or react to this interview and upload it to YouTube, 100% you can do that. And in my opinion, I don't think anyone should ever even have to ask another creator for this, because I feel like if you were chosen to interview Ian or a developer or something, you weren't chosen. It's not like your own personal content, right? You as a streamer, and the reason you were picked in the first place is because you're like a conduit of the community. You are asking questions for the community, not for yourself. So it makes no sense that someone would have to ask you permission to watch it on their own stream. It's just the community's content. So, oh, sorry, I said conduit. Yeah, I'm sorry. You can madge. That makes sense. I messed up. I said it. System, too, by the way.
Appreciate it.
Okay, so let's go over what he talked about. So I'll probably skip the part of my question because I don't want to react to me because I probably sound like an idiot. But before, I know you mentioned in a couple other interviews you had seen some of my videos and talked about it with like the AMZ thing. Yeah, dude. Okay, I don't even want to begin the like DK thing. Like, he tried to throw me under the bus 2 more times in this interview. I brought up DKs with death grip being like better than any raid buff on a fight where you need death grips, but I said that to imply that it feels bad to be needed for some things but not needed all the time when 10 of the 13 classes are needed all the time. I was making the case that DK's shamans and hunters should have something that puts them in the raid all the time if they're going all the way down this line. But he just, I don't know, like he turned it on me like I was trying to hurt Death Knights or something. Like I like Death Grip shouldn't be as good, right? It's all good. Pretty funny.
Yep. Long time listener.
Oh, I was so nervous right here.
Thank you for giving us the ammunition to make some changes we wanted to make. It's always appreciated.
No, and then he's saying thanks for giving us the ammunition to make changes that we wanted to make. As in, I gave him ammunition to nerf AMZ. This is not good. I forgot he said this. And he's fucking... Look at that smirk. All right. Okay. All right. Well, okay. They're going to be mad about that, but that's fine. Okay. But yeah, so I just want to get right into it because we have like a pretty limited amount of time. So the first thing I wanted to talk to you about is actually Season 4. So I think, first of all, the community loves it. At best, I think it's a great new idea that can, revolutionize the end of expansion's gameplay. Very worst, honestly, is just objectively better than a super long Season 3. So basically, what are some of your thoughts about Season 4? And if you've had any time during Dragonflight to think about maybe if it could be brought back or improved upon?
Yeah,
I was still pretty nervous at this point.
Thank you for.
Did you hear how out of breath I was
about Season 4?
Did you hear about how out of breath I was at the end? Listen to this. And if you've had any time during Dragonflight to think about maybe if it could be brought back or improved upon, I literally ran out of breath.
Thank you for those thoughts and those reactions. I think it's been overall super happy with how it's played out. Definitely, some bumps the first week, especially with.
Or was it efficient? Because I had exactly enough breath to finish my sentence. Peak efficiency, honestly.
Those thoughts and those reactions. I think it's been overall super happy with how it's played out. Definitely, some bumps the first week, especially with scaling issues. We never really used that tech at this scale before, so we had to work out some of the kinks in the system there. But I think we went into this hoping that it would play out largely the way it had. And if it did, that this could become something that we go to in the future at the very end of an expansion. Just kind of in those last few months, everyone knows the next expansion's on the horizon. You finish the story, you finish the current expansion's content. It's just kind of a remix and a chance to revisit kind of the greatest hits of the expansion as a whole. Tuning has been definitely something we've been looking at. Like I think now that people have more gear, pretty happy with where that's landed. And we definitely heard a lot of feedback, especially the first couple of weeks, from like Hall of Fame and Cutting Edge, but not guilds like your.
I'm just gonna stop him before he ends this. This is definitely very polarizing because like the people at the top who did all these dungeons or raids Cutting Edge, you're going back and doing these raids and the affixes actually make them easier. Like for us, the affixes make these fights much easier than if they didn't have them because they just make you very powerful and they're easy to handle. But at the pug level and at the lower level cutting edge or even AOTC level, the affixes are actually somewhat of an issue. Some of them, specifically Creation Spark. And also, they are not easily clearing these raids. There's probably a few reasons for that. I think maybe the main reason is this. If you guys have ever raided in a 3-night guild, let's say you raid Wednesday, Thursday, and Monday. Just making it up. Wednesday is the first raid of the week. Okay, Wednesday, you re-clear some bosses. You get to the boss you're progressing on. And then all day on Thursday, you have a great day of progression because you just got to the boss. It's one day of just all one boss. And then Monday comes around. You take 4 days off. And then 3 days off. You come back on Monday, and you have a significantly worse raid night than you had on Thursday. Because it's just been 3 days since you have last pulled this fight, and a lot of people just forget. And it's just, there's just getting the muscle memory of doing it over and over again and just remembering all the things you have learned is much harder to do with 3 days in between than doing it the day after. That is Season 4 incarnate, right? You're just doing this for raids you haven't done in a year. And even if you have the skill to do it in the exact same roster, it's just been a minute. I don't think the affixes are as much of the deal. That being said, if you want, I think the affixes are a fair criticism. I think Season 4 could exist, bringing back old raids and just tuning them to be a little easier, but not having affixes because the affixes help you kill them. And then, I don't think the content is necessarily any better or worse. I think the affixes were certainly an experiment, but I don't think it either dooms Season 4 or is the reason it's great. They're just kind of there. They're kind of fun, but some of them kind of, you know what I mean? I think it's a good idea to experiment with it, but I think if you brought back Season 4 and next expansion at the end, you could just do it without affixes even, and I don't think it would necessarily have a negative impact on the thing. So I wouldn't accept affixes as a major criticism of this season because you can kind of just not have them and it would be the same thing. Yeah, and more so kind of what he's saying is guilds are wiping in this and they're unable to kind of clear, but yeah, we'll let him finish the answer.
Guild. That it felt too much like reprogression, and it's then we go look at logs and realize look, you guys wiped 5 times then killed the boss. That's not really progression, but I get it, right?
Damn, a little bit of Ian Flame basically saying, hey, I hear y'all complaining that you can't re-clear. Checked the tape, you all re-cleared it, shut up. That's what he's saying. He's actually saying step off me. He pushed you off when he did that.
It feels like you've already learned this fight. It feels like you've already killed the boss. You expect to just go in and win, but we want there to be a little bit of a challenge. So I think overall it's played out pretty much the way we wanted to.
I was wrong about this season. I thought and actually I think it's a good thing that I was wrong. I thought they were going to make Season 4 very easy because of a reaction to Sepulcher. And I was wrong. They made it pretty normal, average difficulty than what it would be in a normal season. Obviously it's a lot different because you're doing fights you already know, and that's half the problem or more. And it's just a gear and tuning thing and then affixes, whatever. I just thought it would be way easier to do, and I was wrong about that. But I think this is a good thing. Because I think I was worried about Vault in the first dungeon of next expansion, or first raid. I was worried it would get Emerald Nightmared. And not because it's the first raid of an expansion. That's no longer a reason for a raid to be easy for 3 expansions now. They don't do that anymore. But also, just they have a history of massively overcorrecting for problems in raids. And the problem in Sepulcher for the community was that it was too difficult. So I thought they would make it too easy. But seeing the way they did Season 4, which was much closer to Season 3 than the next expansion will be, and they didn't make that decision, gives me a lot of hope that they won't make the next raid too easy. All right, great, yeah. And some other things that were added during Season 4, outside of the actual gameplay element of faded affixes and raids, were a lot of the loot acquisition systems. So you had to create a few new unique ones because of the way the raids would be rotating. But I kind of wanted to ask you about them. So Dinar and the upgrade essences from Heroic and Mythic, like I said, I think they're excellent. Is there a chance that we could actually see a truncated version of this in a regular season that would maybe help with loot targeting? So an idea for that is currently someone could do an entire Mythic Sanctum raid every week and never see a Jathis maybe. It obviously would have to be much less, but what could that look like?
I think something like this for sure. I think kind of like the season, the season.
No one liked the use of truncated. I thought it was solid, but it's whatever. Whatever.
Structure. It's.
Oh wait, Skarzard said loot ? Systems. Yeah. Please don't say systems. They do not like when you say systems. The trick is when you say system. I just said it 4 times. You can say account wide, and that offsets the system and hard farms pogs, and then it like equals out. If you ever mess up and you say it too many times.
We see this as a time for experimentation, and experiments aren't necessarily going to be carried forward in their exact form, but the idea of like anti-RNG backstops and some feeling of security and guarantee.
So this is interesting. He actually answered this question basically by saying, like, it's a good experiment and it worked for the season, but we don't know if it fits into a regular season because we like the mystifying feeling of really searching out a loot drop and finally getting it. And that hit of dopamine of looting an item is that feeling. So this isn't like abstract. This is their answer to a lot of things, and it's kind of just fundamental to the philosophy of loot and WoW. Like, people brought up Final Fantasy a lot, and they're like, well, in Final Fantasy, it's just way easier to get gear. But, like, loot and Final Fantasy are as different as, like, trying to compare rating between the two games or questing between the two games. It's just a completely different universe. Like, it's a different thing. Loot in Final Fantasy is, like, a means to an end, and in a way, WoW is, like, loot is kind of, like, what you're playing the game for in a way. So, like, the feeling, while it's, yes, easier to obtain loot in Final Fantasy, the idea of what WoW is going for and how they go for that differently is the feeling of getting a piece of loot that really impacts you and has a high power level is a bigger like hit to feeling good of getting that than it is by just instantly acquiring gear or having a more deterministic way of getting loot. However, I do think WoW could potentially be served positively by having a very minor version of this mythic upgrade currency and heroic upgrade currency and dinar in a season, even if it's just one. Or even if you have the opportunity to like re-roll your vault and mulligan it, but get like 2 less options, but you just have it. Like, I just think like just just a drop of loot targeting in this in a season would be so nice. Like it used to happen with bonus roll coins, but I think bonus roll coins kind of had their own issues. But I think just something, just a fucking drop, just a real quick, just a tiny drop of loot targeting would be nice.
That you will eventually get that chase best in slot item you want feels like a useful thing for us to explore. I mean, the dinar system, I think, in terms of how upfront it is and how quickly you're getting some things, that is probably way more accelerated than we would ever do in a regular news season.
Definitely.
There's a couple of reasons for that. One is like the 3-week rotation means that you just get fewer shots at getting these items. Also, like psychologically, most of these are items that you already had. Like, while it was relevant, you got your Jathis, you got your Sylvanas daggers, whatever else, and so you're having to re-earn them. I think it would, to some extent, I think more than some extent, I think it would diminish the feeling of chasing after that like real trophy item if just week 3 or week 4 of a brand new tier, maybe even before you like kill the boss that dropped it on a specific difficulty, everyone could just walk in and get their item. Ups and downs, and being excited about a loot jackpot has value, but feeling like you could do all the right things but never get it is definitely a bummer. We want to see what we can do about that going forward.
Sweet, yeah. And I think also you're going to kind of have a little bit of that reintegrated into every season going forward as well with like the new Mythic Plus pool, right? Like part of you're doing a bunch of new Mythic Plus dungeons. You're also going to see a bunch of new, potentially best in slot or very interesting trinkets and things to try. So you're going to have a lot of more loot to kind of go around.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, so then another thing, that's it about Season 4. I kind of just wanted to talk to you about like current raid accessibility in WoW. So I've heard you speak a lot
hard shut this
about,
down.
you know, like people always
He
ask
hard
about
shut
10
this
mans
down
and stuff. And I basically my like, not my dream, because this doesn't even affect me. It's just more for the game. I think there's just so many guilds right now that can't fill raids on some nights, especially later into expansions and later into seasons, to where, you know, they're just looking for a player. And I just think the Mythic lockout comes with like a lot of issues with that. But basically he's saying like, no, we want you to like build relationships with people, form a guild, form a more consistent pug, right? And stick with those people for their lockout. I think there's ups and downs to that. I'll let him finish the answer. A lot of people agree with him too. Yeah, I think I actually really agree with like, dude. Yeah, dude. No, dude, this is what some people don't get. You said, no, you just want to split runs and sell mounts. I promise you. I know it's easy to like look at race world first guilds and think, I actually dread the idea of that. I hate that. It would devalue gold. It would just be such a pain in the ass. I'm serious. I never want to do that in my life. I fucking hate it. I think basically every point I made here was in support of casual players. Although he did try to call me out on the, or not casual players, like AOTC or cutting edge level pugs. Do pugs get cutting edge? Probably not. But maybe that's kind of what his point was. 20 mans in WoW with how many specs there are and how vast and variable the different types of combat styles and also the ways that specs deal with that exists. I think 20 man is excellent. But I think there are a lot of things in the game where maybe the barrier of entry could be questioned at that point. So I think the first one I would want to talk about is actually the Mythic raid lockout currently. So I think this exists where a lot of guilds, let's just say they want to do prototype Pantheon, and they're looking, there's a guild raid. They don't want to cancel the raid. They need 2 people. Well, it's going to be really hard for someone to sign up for that group maybe if they really want loot from Skolex and Vigilant Guardian, and they're like, I don't want to get myself locked into this group's raid if I'm not going to continue or if we don't kill it. Basically, this is a good point. This absolutely happens all the time to guilds. Like, this is an issue with the lockout, is that you can't actually go to do bosses later on because you need loot from the early ones. You just lock yourself out of loot. This is like kind of like how the Mythic one could work, like the heroic lockout. But yeah, basically he's just like, yeah, we understand that. We see that's an issue, but we want you to find a guild. Basically what I'm asking is, and he absolutely dunks me, maybe the Mythic lockout is outdated in 2022, and it would maybe help a thriving pug system of more raids being able to happen at the 20-man raid size.
So what I'm hearing is you want to do more splits, Mythic splits, more mount sales.
Now,
all of that.
This is something that always gets brought up to me, that it's this would honestly be something, every time this gets brought up, I bring this up as a major downside. Also, he definitely windmill dunked on me, but not like, have you guys ever seen someone get dunked on? What Ian did to me was, he did not windmill dunk on me. He windmill dunked me, but I was the ball. So like, he windmill dunked on a basketball hoop, like 10 feet basketball hoop, but I was the ball and he threw me through the hoop. So yeah, he definitely owned me. Obviously, every time I talk about this, that is not what I want. Like, if you guys know me at all, I literally want nothing to do with sales. I hate sales. I want them so fucking gone out of the game. So does everyone in our guild. They're a means to an end. No one likes doing this shit. I think it would be an unintended side effect of this. I think it would be better for the rating economy of the game, but he obviously has the other opinion, so we'll hear his opinion here. I dread about it, but I honestly think a lot of stuff that is a side effect where what we do is more crazy.
Yeah,
dude, I agree with Tags, dude. What Tag said, I liked him when I got dollars for it. Back in the day when you could like RMT infinitely, then like sale runs fucking sign me up. But like, there's nothing you could do with gold, man. That was like actually like 7 years ago. It's miserable. I think it could be potentially much better for a lot of other people in the game.
So it could be. So I think when you talk about pugs, for sure, you know, the rigid lockout system for Mythic is inconvenient for pugs, but I think at its core...
Okay, fuck. I shouldn't have said pugs. I really am not targeting pugs. I shouldn't have said pugs. I feel like that led him down the wrong path. Basically what I'm saying is, like, it's guilds. I'm saying this for guilds that struggle to fill their Mythic raids later in seasons when people quit, stop playing due to Classic coming out, or some other new game, or Blizzard had a lawsuit, or whatever. Like, people just end up not raiding and guilds die, and less guilds would die if they could fill raids with people who felt comfortable finding groups through the group finder, and that can't really happen because of the Mythic lockout. I think it's much less about you're admitting to RMT. Dude, literally everyone RMT'd back in the day. We all got punished for it. It's open information, dude. Yeah. The
Mythic raid difficulty isn't really meant for pugs. People will pug it later on in the season for sure, especially on bigger servers. Certainly, you know, in season 4 like this, where the fights are much better known, the tuning's more forgiving, sure. But it's one of those things where, like, the lockout is an example of a little bit of healthy friction. We talk about, you know, friction that can have social benefits, like, you know, stuff that was removed when we added Raid Finder, Dungeon Finder back in the day. This is one of those examples in that joining a Mythic raid is a little bit of a commitment. And I could argue that there's an upside for pugs as well, which is that, you know, if you're doing a Mythic Nathria pug, kill Shriekwing, and then suddenly, you know, things aren't going great on Altamore, it's a great reason not to bail on that group. It's a great reason to not have a quarter of the group say, "Now these guys don't get it. I'm out. I'm going to find another group," because you're locked for the week. You're together with them.
You have to figure it out. Yeah,
and like that, I think that actually encourages somewhat stronger social bonds, reliance on others. At the same time, you know, I get it if you just want to jump in and get one boss, but I think the downsides to the overall Mythic ecosystem, if we just removed that lockout and made them flex, would outweigh the upsides. And there's a reason why, like, normal heroic are designed to be much more inherently flexible in structure, pug friendly. That's why those work that way.
Fuck, I really think me saying the word pug got a completely different answer, because that's not even who I was fighting for. It was for the, I'm not even going to make up a world rank, but the very low level cutting edge guild to guilds that do Mythic but don't get cutting edge.
That's why Mythic still works the old way.
But I actually am interested in your guys' opinion. So you guys just heard his opinion. I just want to hear a poll. So Mythic lockouts. Make it just whatever chat thinks. Make it like Heroic, which was what I was kind of suggesting, or Ian suggesting, which he's probably right. Keep it the way it is. Yeah, it's probably closer to 50-50. Basically, there's reasons for both, but at least he kind of heard my take on it and gave his take. I respect it. Is there they need to find a middle ground for it? Is there really a middle ground? Here would be a nice middle ground. If you want to join that prototype Pantheon group to try to get a sigil, but then you don't kill it, you even attempting the boss locks you from loot for the first 3. That seems wrong, right? Doesn't that seem wrong? That you can pull a boss on Mythic that you don't even kill, and then you just get locked from loot on every other fight. Like, it just seems off. You could even get kicked almost. Someone's saying make lockouts based on a few bosses at a time. So you're like starting at checkpoints. Wait, why don't I hate that? Why don't I hate that? That actually doesn't sound bad. I was expecting that to be like Turbo Bong Cloud idea. That's actually not a bad idea. I don't know if that's a good idea, but it's definitely not bad. Yeah, it's like LFR wings almost, but for Mythic lockout. Now, who knows? We're not going to spend too much time on this, but it's just something to think about. Okay, cool. So no plans to change that. And yeah, the split thing, no. The split thing would definitely be a very unintended side effect from that. Like the absolute terror of potentially seeing like Scott message and be like, okay, everyone show up tomorrow. We're going to be boosting Mythic Jailer for like 12 hours. Something. I mean, oh my Lord, would that be bad? I really hope people understand that this is genuine. We hate this shit. That is the worst way I could possibly ever spend a Saturday. We get nothing out of that. Like, it's so bad. Okay, so I agree with that. We just got an ad. We just got an ad. I'll wait. What can we do during this thing? I'll check Twitter. Anyone got any hot tweets? Scripe Twote? What did Scripe Twote? Is that the past tense of tweet? He tweeted at WatcherDev, day 1 Mythic, no PTR testing, global release. Yeah, that would definitely be ideal. They have stated and never will global release. No PTR testing is interesting. I definitely heard, like, there's definitely a rumor going around that someone heard from someone, I did not hear anything, that, like, Blizzard is not planning on doing testing. That is what someone said. Now, I hate to be spreading this because I know this comes from most likely someone just fucking made this up and they just spread this. Because if you think about it logically, it makes no fucking sense for them to do this. Ian actually mentioned raid testing in the interview, which might be a sign, but also, like, there's no reason for them to do it. Like, they've already stopped making decisions for the World First race. Like, they've like stated it. Like, there's like they've made decisions for the race World First that have affected other people negatively. And they have like kind of decided to not do that anymore. This would basically be that. Like, the main people it benefits to not test is us. Most everyone else has a video of the boss out when they're pulling it regardless. Even though it'd be kind of cool. And if you think about it, like, they'd just be giving away free... Like, there's no amount of work those QA testers can do that can replicate thousands of people pulling these bosses at the same time. It's just incredibly efficient. There's no logic involved in them not doing it. So I highly doubt they would. I think the hype of the Race World First Blind would actually benefit how many people would be interested in the raid. Yeah, that's always the weird thing you can never actually figure out, is you can never figure out how much positive press the Race World First gives Blizzard and how many people actually raid because they're watching it. No one actually knows the answer to that. I get hundreds of messages every time we do the raid, but that's just me, and who knows the amount of people that don't message. Or so basically the reason is this. I always say they're not going to do things because the Race World First because it's 50 people, but it's not really 50 people because it impacts the mindset of a lot more than 50 people, right? So yeah, I don't know. I don't exactly know. Okay, so Wowhead. Dude, Wowhead is just straight fucking ripping posts. Oh, yeah, we'll get to all these in a second when I keep watching. Let's go. Another thing, just along the lines of accessibility. So in BFA, you guys came out with the Hall of Fame with the whole like Horde versus Alliance thing in that expansion. and it became the trigger for cross-realm being available. So the game has seen multiple additions recently to make the game more accessible, so cross-faction being a major one, and then also with the region-wide auction house. Is there any possibility we could get cross-realm at the beginning or earlier in the season in Dragonflight now that the Hall of Fame is less relevant?
Yeah, I think it's like I don't think we're likely to do it right from the very beginning, though we're moving in that direction. We did it for Sepulchre before the Hall of Fame was full. I think it's likely we're going to repeat that again for Vault going forward. In general, the game as a whole.
Okay, then if you're releasing it before Alliance Hall of Fame is full, which like makes sense because like, and how are they even going to do the Hall of Fame now? Is it just going to be 200 guilds regardless of faction? Because of like you know what I mean? But like regardless, like I just don't see why Hall of Fame has any relevance to when Cross Realm happens. But it's nice to hear that it says they're going to be doing it earlier in a patch.
I think is moving at tearing down server boundaries. We want to make more and more things cross server. I think we recognize 15 years ago, back in Classic, if you log into Classic today, you have the strength of sort of insular, self-contained communities where you're seeing the same people over and over again, and there's a lot of upsides that offset the downsides of some of these restrictions. I think in the modern game, really, server increasingly feels like restrictions without as much upside, and so we are systematically working at chipping away at all of those divisions. It just takes time. So I think when we get to a point where things like potentially cross-server guilds down the line and so forth are on the table, I think fully cross-server raids from the start will be automatic. But for now, we want to, while we're working towards it, we want to make sure we're not, pulling the rug out from our existing social structures. And so earlier, but not day one.
Okay, great. Yeah, the only reason I asked that too is clearly this entire accessibility thing was targeted on acknowledging that the 20-man raid size is goated, and I think it is. But obviously other games where you can raid, it's much easier nowadays in 2022 to get into content with a few of your friends. I don't think lowering WoW's raid size is the best move for the game. So the answer there is making raids more accessible. So the reason I targeted cross-faction guilds, cross-realm raiding, and the Mythic lockout are all three ways that I see as massive benefits to making raids, Mythic raiding more accessible for all players, all guilds, and all people trying to get into guilds and raid Mythic bosses. That was the reason I brought up all of this. So, and again, just the two more questions basically about raid accessibility. And the main one would be actually talking about something you guys have previously done with cross-faction. I think largely this has been really, really good for the game. Obviously, there's still a few things, like it's a little clunky to invite sometimes cross-faction. And then also there's some situations currently with like raid lockouts. Like if you were to race change previously, like let's say for Skolex, you want to go be dwarf in your alliance, and that's already fine. Now it's perfectly realistic for you to be able to race change to maybe Blood Elf and still raid with your guild, but it will like brick your Mythic lockout. So I think something that can solve this, and something you guys have spoke on before, is basically is there any progress being made to the technical limitation of cross-faction guilds? Is it something maybe mid-expansion or much longer than that, do you think? I went a little bit long with this question. I didn't need to mention the bricked lockout thing, although I am glad I did it in hindsight, because I thought it would detract from the question, but he's very good at this, and he answered the question fully, and then afterwards he did mention that they know about the bricking lockout thing and said they're working on fixing it. So that was very good. This was the one question. I was going to have very detailed questions. I talk a lot. But this is the one where I think I maybe had one too many sentences. This one.
There's definitely progress being made. It's something we want to do. It's not really responsible for me to commit to a time frame. I would say I would like us to do it before the next expansion.
Okay.
But it's in the hands of a lot of engineering problem solving, and just a lot of these changes are pulling on a thread in code and systems that have been built to work a certain way for 20 years, and realizing like, hey, this is trickier than we expected. It may be easier than we expected. We'll see. But definitely recognize there's some awkwardness, as some groups have had people faction change that want to keep raiding together, and not being able to share the same guild chat, the same guild repairs, guild bank, etc., guild achievements gets in the way. A lot of the other stuff you talked about, I think a lot of those are what I would consider bugs. There's a few that we're working on tracking down specifically with cross-faction whispers or invites. Mm-hmm. If you're in a group with somebody, if you've applied to the group finder group, if you're trying to reply to a message, like all of that should just work. Anytime it fails to work, that's a bug. Now, but the thing we want to make sure is that there's some opt-in connection. You're not just getting a whisper from a random mm-hmm. Cross-faction person that ganked you in the outdoor world or whatever. And then also similarly, I think faction change, that's just something we need to change. Like the fact that it stops your lockout is a vestige of how the system was built, when of course two people of opposite factions couldn't be in the same raid in the same lockout. We just nuked your old one to avoid that collision. We shouldn't be doing that now, but again, that's an example of an old system that needs to be updated.
Sweet. Okay. This was the point where we were 10 minutes into the interview, and I realized that I thought I had 40 minutes of questions, but in reality I had like 25, and they were all really good. So I think this is when I started improvising, or it was after this next question, because I just never interviewed someone before, so I didn't know I didn't know like how much I needed and how long it would take. So I over prepared, and then when I found out I didn't have an hour-long interview, I then cut a lot of questions and I removed them from my document, and then I realized that I removed too much, so then I had to kind of YOLO it. All right, so this is a big one, and this is again, I've heard your philosophy on this multiple times. The WoW has gone through a very long history of going back and forth between bring the player or the class. So last expansion, playing perfectly optimally, there was about 7 spots in a 20-man raid that were basically required with something that you could not really replace with any other class. This expansion so far, again, taking a few liberties, but even leaving a few out, there's a bit closer to 12. Speaking for a not world first or high level cutting edge team who will probably make it work regardless, but more for the 10 to 15 man AOTC level teams that might not have some very powerful buffs or might have to swap classes and like play something they maybe don't like as much to make themselves more powerful. I understand a lot of people don't need to be fully optimal, but yeah. Basically, can you explain your philosophy around raid buffs and how it's differed from X-Back to X-Back, where some classes were not required and now might be?
Yeah. So okay. Let's see. Let me make sure I have.
That was a
all
long
of that
question.
right.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. No. Okay. So like, I guess, I mean, so some of it is stuff you mentioned that I've talked about in the past, but I think the origins of bring the player, not the class, were like the extreme other end of the spectrum back in late Burning Crusade, where it wasn't just raid buffs; it was a matrix of party buffs, and it was, as people saw in BC raiding. Well, you need a rogue in the group with a warrior to give battle shout. The warrior needs Wind Fury, or they're bad, and sometimes you'd have somebody who's a good player, plays a class that's theoretically good, but you don't have room for them in your specific raid party matrix, and so they can't contribute. That felt clearly not what we wanted, and we moved away from that steadily. But I think where we're moving back towards is class mattering, making sure that the best raid composition, if you want to be optimal, is one that has representation of all 12, soon to be all 13 classes.
Now, this is where I kind of improvised my follow-up question to this, because as soon as he said this, I felt like I had to make it known that, and I believe this list is right, Hunters, Shamans, and Death Knights are these singular only classes in the game that do not have Warlock level utility that is outside of a raid buff, or they're the only classes without a required raid buff. So they're on the way to this, but they actually haven't done it yet. And that's why I had to have him clarify with the DK grip question, because I wanted to know if they felt like the fact that DKs have death grip and it's that good, do they consider that DK's thing that requires them in content? Because it's very controversial, right? Because it's just so necessary on those fights, but then so not necessary. So my only reason of asking that is basically advocating for DKs to get something that puts them in the raid, at least one of them.
And that's 20-player Mythic raid format supports that. I think that's something that is friendly for pugs as well in a flex raid setting. Like if you're a pug leader, you're trying to recruit the optimal group, get a group together. If you don't have a warlock, you should be looking for a warlock. If you don't have a hunter, you should be looking for a hunter, as opposed to which is the meta range spec, this tier, let me just bring 5 of them and we're good to go. That helps provide social opportunities for the full range of players. Now, that said, we want to make sure that none of these buffs feels too impactful to the point that it's like you can't go without it. It's utterly mandatory at multiple levels of play, not just the top tier level. In that case, we want to look at things like tuning. We want to look at things like alternate buff items that can provide a substitute, or just increasing availability. I think the 2 most classic ones in this space are Bloodlust, Battle Res. I think no group at almost any level is going to go without them. The percentage of classes that brings those buffs has decreased naturally over the years. That's something we're looking at changing. So a little scoop for you.
Before he answers this, that isn't something I honestly think about. And the reason why is everything I'm thinking about is more raid focused. This is probably something that's more relevant in Mythic Plus. But in raid, you don't think about having to get a lust or a battle res because classes that have raid buffs that you need already have them already. They have them just passively. Like mages have lust and mages are required. Check. All good. That's perfect. Mages, what is it? Like warlocks are required and always have been. They have battle res, right? And gateway, stuff like that. So I don't know if that's...
I think you'll probably
It's just basically making Mythic Plus more redundant.
see this in the next beta build, or next alpha build, rather. Evokers will bring Bloodlust. So
I thought this was interesting. Well, let's see if I have a facial expression here.
the 4th Lust class in the...
Okay, I kind of look menacingly off to the side. Not at my chat or anything. Nothing is on that side of my screen. That's just off into the nether. The reason why is because if you're going to... I think they did it thematically because like they have like time magic and shit. So like being able to bring Bloodlust makes sense for them. There's probably other classes that could use that more than Evokers who already have so much. But also, dude, Evokers are so weird. Evokers have so much, but they also just have a 25-yard range, and it is really hard to look past that. Maybe that would have been a good question. I wonder if they're positive on 25-yard range for healers, because that class has so much power to it, potentially, but will just automatically get removed from multiple raid fights that exist currently, unless they just totally make every room smaller because of Evoker.
mix. We're also looking at adding battle res to one more class. Possibly paladins, likely paladins, but don't like 100% quote me on that.
Well, they will. So now that you said likely paladins, if they don't get it, they will be upset. But it sounds like if you're again going thematically, they only gave it Evoker Lust because it makes sense with time magic. They're probably only going to give paladins battle res because they can realistically, like do some paladin shit and like res someone, right? Or whatever. I think it was divine intervention. Is that what it used to be called? They'll probably just call it that and bring it back. Okay.
Yeah. And then for the rest, like we want to take a step back and
I guess priest works. Yeah, you're right.
look at the whole ecosystem now that we've explored the space of individual buffs, like on the class level. We don't want to close that door and say, no, we're not doing this. But it's absolutely possible that when you take all 38 specs in their totality, there's just too much of this now. And we're too close to the Burning Crusade space, at which point over the next month, we'll want to pull back on some of those.
Okay.
But yeah.
All right. Yeah. So actually, I will have a follow-up question on that because that was actually, first of all, that was an amazing answer. Thank you for that. But so when you talk about like a scenario where, okay, if you are trying to play optimally, you maybe will want to have one of every spec. I think there's a couple of polarizing versions of raid utility right now that I kind of want to hear your opinion on. So currently, I think of how many classes are there now? Is it 13 with Evokers?
Yep.
Okay, with 13 classes, I think 10 have ones where they have either an hour-long raid buff that is basically irreplaceable, or are in some way bringing them to raid. Like for example, warlocks don't have them, but if you've been around, gateways, hellstones, summons, wipe recovery, all those things are extremely powerful, and you need one of those classes. How do you look at abilities like DK's Death Grip, where it's not a class you need to have? I use DK's as an example. I could have brought up Hunter as well. Like hunters do have reasons they're brought into raids. Like sometimes you bring in BM because they're just insanely good mobily with like BM Hunter, like on Halanders, for example. BM was such a good class. It was so mechanically difficult and so much movement that bringing a class that didn't have to worry about their movement as a ranged was insane. Hunters have Turtle. Turtle is a unique immunity to where you can do things that other immunities cannot. You can move around fast as fuck with it up. Paladins can do it, but they're slower than Hunters generally with all their stuff up. So like there's reasons you bring Hunters to raid. Also, Binding Shot is just a button that nothing else in the game comes close to, and that's been relevant on multiple Mythic end bosses. Right, so it's not just Death Grip. Basically, what I'm asking here is if you really think it should be, he's literally said this, it should be optimal to bring one of each spec to a 20-man raid. That's their idea for Dragonflight. Currently, there are 3 classes where that is not true. And so I just kind of wanted his opinion on whether, basically what I'm asking this is, do you think that they already have that, or are you guys looking to add something like that for DKs, Shamans, and Hunters? Or one of each class, not spec, sorry. I said spec on accident. If he said it should be optimal to bring one of each spec, or one of each class, I now see why I said it wrong. Like, do you think that's how the game is right now? Because it's not. And if that's the case, are you announcing basically that you are looking to add permanent raid buffs and utilities to other classes? Which that's why I rephrased the question. And the raid every pull, but if they're no, Wind Fury does not count. There's a situation where Wind Fury is just a numbers thing. It's just like it's not only the tuning of shamans, but the tuning of other classes. Basically, with Wind Fury, all you do is you add up how much damage you're giving to other classes, and you look at how much damage they're doing. Basically, single target. You can look at it in Cleave, but single target's the most relevant. And then you just add that number up, and then you just look at bars. When we're talking about classes being required in raid, we're not talking about bars, okay? Warcraft logs. Okay, statistics for literally any raid. I'm just gonna drop some bars on the screen. All bosses, all percentiles, 95. Okay, let's just look at Council Blood. Cool. All right, so here's some bars, right? And Wind Fury is not required raid utility. All it is it just shows you, it just adds to your bar. So if you add the best 4 scenarios for Wind Fury, their bar just goes up a little bit. But if their bar isn't at the top, you don't bring them. That's simple. They bring Wind Rush. Yes, they're extremely tanky. Their new kit in Dragonflight is awesome. It's possible they're tuned high enough to be brought to a raid all the time, but that's not what we're talking about at all. Any class can just be tuned high enough to get brought to the raid. What we're talking about is exactly what he's referencing, which is classes being basically required optimally, regardless of tuning, just based on what they have. Currently, shamans, hunters, death knights do not possess that. They all possess things that make them particularly strong in certain scenarios. They tried to address it with shaman with the party buffs. They're working on some kind of utility with that sentinel owl for hunter. And then DKs have a very weak raid defensive cooldown, and they have grips, and again, grip is better than every raid buff in the entire game when it's good, but it's only good on average like 1 or 2 out of every 10 fights, and that's not the same as what every other class is working with. So I just wanted him to clarify that. What about rogue? Rogues bring 2 things next expansion. One that I'd like to see class-wide. Rogues bring atrophic poison. It makes bosses do 3% less damage to you, and when you have Shiv on the boss is not to you, to the entire raid, close to 7%. It doesn't work for environmental things, but for most big AoEs in the game, they are sourced from the boss, so it's absolutely just as necessary as Devotion Aura. That's just assassination. Yep, it is. That's kind of the issue. Currently, it's only for assassination, but it doesn't really matter. It just means you're always going to have exactly 1 assassination rogue. My issue with that is I hate that it's 1 spec. I think they should make that poison class-wide, so anytime you're playing outlaw or sub, you are not playing the spec you want to play, but you're only the 2nd or 3rd thing in the thing. If atrophic is class-wide, then you only play outlaw. I think you need to wait and see what Restless Crew looks like. They've iterated on it a lot. It's still not implemented. We don't even know if it's actually even going to exist. It's potentially really problematic. So yeah, there's not a lot to go off on that yet. But yeah, I mean, atrophic poison is better than Restless Crew in a raid. That's the main one. And then, yeah, Restless Crew after that can be good. If there's a raid boss or a dungeon or something that requires grips, that is as important or more important than that. So how do you balance between classes that just have a button that puts them in the raid versus classes that have such strong situational utility where they're needed immensely for small things, but not for every boss?
So you're asking us to nerf Death Grip, in other words. No.
That's the opposite of what I'm saying.
No, I know.
Yeah.
Honestly, carefully. Like, it needed...
He has good comedic timing. He was thinking about that answer for like 4 seconds, but he just let it simmer.
It is the thing that shouldn't be something that we're building in encounters, certainly on non-mythic difficulties. Like, if having knockbacks, having Death Grip, having a certain tool...
I think I asked this question improperly because he phrases this entire answer around the strength of Death Grip, when the entire point of this is that Death Grip is very good, but it's not for every boss, and that's not the same as a raid buff.
Makes your life a bit easier in normal and heroic. Great. And again, like, pug leaders, especially, like, pug leaders are encouraged to, you know, it's flex raid for a reason. Look for a Death Knight. There's a ton out there who are actively looking for groups.
Mm-hmm.
Get one in, it'll help you. Philosophically, like, we talk about normal versus heroic. I think part of the difference there, like, a normal group, normal mode is pugs, but also just really casual friends and family groups that are just there to play with each other. They're not looking to bring strangers into their group. They're not necessarily looking to, like, recruit to get a certain class or re-roll.
Yeah, I must have fucked up this question in some way. Like, well, actually, I don't think so. I think I asked it fine. I just did not exactly lay out where I thought the issue was, but it's not a big problem because I had enough time in this interview after he talked about this to actually rephrase what I was asking.
We want to make sure that at that difficulty, you can succeed regardless. You can succeed with a very suboptimal comp as long as you have the basics covered. At heroic level, like to some extent, the difference there, even if you're not like cutting edge mythic, you still, there's some challenge, there's some coordination. You care about success. You're not going to bring along a person who's doing 50% less damage than everybody else if you're failing to meet a DPS check. And so in that space, bringing in classes that can help you is useful. If it's ever literally impossible, then we're going to probably make mechanical changes to the encounter. We're going to give you more time. We're going to, you know,
have there ever been
cast interruptible?
Well, using the word literally is hard. Have there been fights that were, what were the fights that were closest to literally impossible without certain classes or specs in the game? Although he is talking about heroic, not mythic. Very important. You could bring up Mythic Cahoon without gates. You could bring up Agrimar without grips. You could bring up Zymox? Why do you guys keep saying Zymox? You can do Zymox with whatever. Like every single class ever. Oh, Mythic Artificer. Oh, you're thinking of Sepulcher Zymox with the Gateway. Yeah. Yeah. We're talking about Heroic, though. He specifically mentioned Mythic you should be optimizing around having these things. He's referring to Heroic specifically in this example. So I feel like not too many Heroic bosses where you needed a certain class, actually. There are major like mythic applications of this, but not many heroic. So yeah, he kind of has a point. Heroic Cahoon? You didn't need a warlock on Heroic Cahoon. What about Soul Render heroic without Death Grip? What, I don't even remember what Soul Render heroic does. There wasn't even the big add on heroic, right? That's fine. Yeah, no.
We'll do something there, so it's like it's not just ridiculously punishing if you don't have that specific class.
So he's actually right.
Honestly, though, like things like Death Grip, we would like more of those because it's so cool. Because it's.
I agree with that, by the way.
More than
he's not saying more classes should have things like Death Grip. They're saying more classes should have that really powerful thing that makes them really good on a specific thing, like Death Grip does, which is cool.
Just 5% damage or whatever passive buff, it lets you shape your strategy, and I think lets the player who is the Death Knight, even though they may, you know, resent having to run out and do some utility at the expense of their parse here or there, it lets them feel like they have a special role that's contributing to their group's success.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with that. Also, just because chat's definitely like these DKs are wild, but yeah, I was more kind of along the lines of like implying like I think it's hunters, DKs, and shamans, I believe, that are the only class in the game basically that has situational fight utility instead of just they have something that makes them in all the time. So I was kind of just saying like maybe if you did actually want where like okay you will always have at least one of these, so you have one of each class, and he did state that is what they wanted, but currently that's not the case. That's why I rephrased the question. 7 spots now to fill with just what you want if you're being optimal. Obviously you don't have to be if you're being optimal, and then you have that, but currently there are, I think it's only, you're kind of trending in this direction, so maybe we haven't seen the full vision of it, but like there is still I think like 2 or 3 classes that don't have something that puts them in the raid all the time.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, we are looking at representation.
I don't even remember his answer here because at this point I had 2 more questions and 12 more minutes. So I had to, this is where I improvised a lot. Basically every question I ask after this that is not Mythic Plus, and the last 2 questions I asked were all completely improvised because we were going faster than I expected, and I don't know how interviews work.
Across, just what the actual stats are. We want to have a good something we feel is a good idea, something that's elegant, that's not, it's easy to say, okay, this class has nothing, they get some new passive 3% stat buff, now everyone has to. But that feels like a cop out, so it's. Dude,
that's crazy. I just said yeah. I was actually just doing that to stay in the conversation, and like, you can just do that in conversation. You just acknowledge that you're hearing them. I was actually completely thinking about what the fuck I was about to ask him after this.
If there's a representation problem that we need to solve and we're coming up with a good idea, we want to move in that general direction, but not at the expense of elegant design.
Excellent. So basically his answer was, we don't think necessarily we need to give them a raid buff or something that puts them in the raid all the time. We can be more elegant about it, but their target goal is that in an optimal, Blizzard said it. He said it in this interview, Mr. Blizzard. He said, in Dragonflight, we want it to be optimal for you to, at least at all times in a Mythic raid scenario, bring one of each class at least. That is what he said. That is currently not what it is with Dragonflight at the moment, but he said that is their goal. I think that's the correct decision. If you're not going to remove raid buffs, which they're obviously going in the complete opposite direction of that, so there's no reason to even... There's a reason I did not ask him that. The only solution is making sure every class has one. Or every class has a spot in a raid, and it's not like you need to bring something else. And that seems like they're going that direction. That's good. I actually kind of... I would need to see it, because like right now, it appears like they kind of think that those classes do have that, but they don't. So they would need to make some changes. But yeah. And actually, this actually isn't even a question. I just wanted to bring something up on the note of like bringing classes to raids and make sure it's accessible. Along something that's often forgot about when talking about the DK thing we talked about at the beginning of this interview, where it was the video you were watching was not about DKs. It was about melee representation in raids. And I want to say since that video, you guys have actually done a very good job at that. This expansion so far, Sanctum and Sepulchre, as opposed to like the normal comp, you've been able to stack basically as much melee in both of those raids on every boss as much as possible, and that has not happened before previously in WoW. So whatever
is this going to farm claps?
It didn't actually trivialize melee, which was my fear for it, and it did make them more accessible. So just thank you for that.
Cool. Thank you.
I wanted to mention that at the beginning, but I didn't know how much time I had. So here I realized I would actually have time to bring that up, but that they should know that. That actually they said they were going to make melee more of a competition for ranged and raids, and that sounded so hard to believe because it's never been like that outside of very niche scenarios. And then the other worry was if they did that, they would just have to... The only way to me it made sense was that, oh, well, if you're going to stack a bunch of melee, it must just mean that melee are easy. And like you're going to make melee easier in raids. And they didn't do that either. They kind of nailed it. Like they honestly fucking owned. This was like one of the better raid changes they've made, and it's not talked about a lot.
And yeah, kudos to the encounter team. Really, I mean, It's something we talked about as an active goal. Like, how can we get ideal raid representation, melee versus range balance, better representing our actual class mix, and do that without, like you said, just making the fights patchwork for melee. Because that was the traditional way back in the day of like, all right, these mechanics just don't target melee. Cool, they can just stand there and punch the boss for 5 minutes, but that's not a good experience for them either.
Yeah. And then just one more last thing before we move. But there's other things about that too. Like like for example, there are fights where melee is still much easier than ranged. Like, but there's not really an alternative. Like on Painsmith, ranged get chains. Melee just kind of follow the boss around, make sure they don't hit bombs. They have to dodge. The main part of the fight is just dodging the spikes and the balls. That's whatever. But like they still had to do that, right? And melee have to like place traps. But ranged ranged on Painsmith is so much harder than melee, and melee are basically patchworking it. But the alternative to that is having melee get chains, and this is actually the way it was on PTR. That was fucking miserable. So like they make good decisions there for that. But yeah, it's definitely some shit. And melee, yeah, they I think they do a good job of that in this game. Is that ranged and melee are not necessarily easier than one another. They play very differently. You'll notice big differences from players swapping roles from melee to ranged DPS rather than melee to melee or range to range. But also there's not a de facto easier spec in raid. Melee on some fights is way harder than ranged. Some fights ranged is way fucking harder than melee. Some fights tanking is easy. Some fights tanking is so hard that your success chance relies on your tank's ability to do it. They actually do a really good job of tossing that difficulty around in this game in Mythic. Move on to Mythic Plus. So you did mention something about, if you need to, you would potentially add them back, but just to specifically ask I was not going to ask this, but I ended up just asking him about Lust Drum's buff and other materials. I actually have two more questions. I made both of these up on the spot. I wonder if they came out well. Let's hear.
Them either.
Yeah. And then just one more last thing before we move on to Mythic Plus. So you did mention something about, if you need to, you would potentially add them back, but just to specifically ask so if you feel like it's hard enough to get certain things in the game, you guys are not opposed to potentially bringing back the scrolls that existed in BFA, or potentially maybe not buffing Lust Drums back to what they are, because you just added another class that brings it, right?
But I think we're open to it. I think part of the challenge there is also when you think about where the scrolls are used, they're not just a raid consumable. They become...
Oh, you were saying, did Ian not pre-screen these questions? Blizzard, I did send him my list of questions, although I did improvise a few of them. I did send them questions. The purpose of them is not pre-screening. It's so, well, I mean, I guess it's like a side purpose. Like if I ask like, hey, Ian, why is if I was just like a random Twitch viewer who like hates WoW, I would just be like, yo, Ian, so just a big gotcha moment. Why do you hate WoW, huh? Like that. Like if he saw me submit that question, he'd probably be like, that's fucking weird. Why would you ask that? Because, why would a human ever ask that? Right, but that's not the point. The point of pre-sending in the questions is if I'm asking him specific things about, like I asked him about cross-faction guilds. If he knows I'm going to ask him about cross-faction guilds, you know what he's going to do? Probably talk to the person who's in charge of like researching and bug fixing and making that work. And he might go and ask them, like get a fresh up-to-date, like this is, maybe he had a meeting with him last week, but he wants to see the updates just to see if he can add something to that answer. Same thing with every other thing I asked him. He's more like a game director is not very involved in the day-to-day, like immediate operations of everything that's happening. So he's reaching out to the people working on it to give the best possible answer. That's why you give him questions ahead of time. But I did improvise. They're basically saying, they're not saying I can't ask questions that I didn't write to him. But if I did write those questions I improvised to him, he might have done a better job at answering them because he could have actually researched them with the people at his company. But I think he answered them really well. So
for open to it. I think part of the challenge there is also when you think about where the scrolls are used, they're not just a raid consumable. They become, a mandatory consumable for every dungeon situation where by definition, you're not going to have class representation.
Kind of true, actually. And the question I ask him about after this is, how do you guys feel about the weapon oils and the armor kits and all this shit? If you have to just have a bunch of scrolls in your bag, does that it like devalues what classes are bringing to the dungeon? And it's just like you just always have every buff, and does that actually change how dungeons interact? You know what I mean?
Because you can't. And then it also starts to turn into like, well, wait, so the thing that I bring as a warrior, as a druid, whatever, is like a 2% better version of this buff where people don't have to spend gold on a consumable. Like that just makes their contribution feel less cool. So ideally we would want to find, a middle ground, whether maybe that's reducing the baseline power or otherwise tuning so that it just still feels like, cool, we have this class, this is a benefit that we have, and the difference between having it and not isn't, something that you can't overcome otherwise.
Okay. And just one more note that it just popped up to me. This expansion in Shadowlands, as opposed to before, you actually you have consumables you use at like the beginning of a dungeon or beginning of a raid fight that is actually in a much higher number than you did previously. So you have like the armor kits, you have the sharpening stones, the oils, that kind of stuff. Do you guys see that continuing into Dragonflight?
That's a good question. I think we've probably gone a bit too far there.
Pog.
And I think as we're nailing down, just finalizing professions for Dragonflight, want to take a step back and see what the sum.
Dude, I want you guys to pay attention to something that happened. I need you to listen very closely and watch me when he answers this, and I'll let you know exactly what I was doing. So on this monitor right here, which you'll see me look at, I have my questions and I have my chat hidden, but you will hear a click on my mouse in this interview, and that click is me opening chat just to see Pogs. See if you can see it.
I think we've probably gone a bit too far there. And I think as we're nailing down, just finalizing professions
hear the click?
Dragonflight, want to take
I was looking at Pogs.
See what the sum total of that experience.
I'm looking at the Pogs right now.
Is. I think a lot of those examples that you gave were things that we did to make blacksmiths and leatherworkers, frankly, feel more relevant, feel like they had something that, other than the legendary crafting templates, they could sell that was part of the economy. Dragonflight is solving that problem on 5 other levels. So, a world where you need to apply 5 or 6 things, it makes each one of them less meaningful, and also just the general economic burden of like doing runs, doing the content, probably gets to be higher than we want it to be.
So basically, the new profession system solves the need for, those professions feeling more relevant, which is why they added those in the first place. And also, he's acknowledging that, yeah, it probably didn't feel too good to be pressing those buttons pre-pull for the entire expansion. Honestly, underrated part of this interview. I feel like armor kits, sharpening stones, and oils being gone is objectively good for the game. I'm glad they're gone. Okay. So that's it for Raid. I just have a few more questions about Mythic Plus.
Sure.
So the Mythic Plus system in Dragonflight, kind of getting a sneak peek of it in Season 4. So I think it'll actually, probably be a lot better now that you've had a run at retuning some old raids, which has been really nice. Old dungeons. The only thing that I could kind of think of as a potential downside is that what happens if, in Season 1, you run into one of your new Dragonflight dungeons that is just extremely good. It is like the key that people want to run, not because it's easy to time. It's just like this key is so very fun. You can think of many. A lot of people have different opinions of these, but like what that would be. It may sadden Mythic Plus players that they have an amazing dungeon and they don't get to play it for a long time. So basically what I'm asking is, what's the balance of good versus new? And if anything, you might not be able to speak on this because it's kind of in the future, but like, do you have any plans for Season 3 or 4 of Mythic Plus? As at that point, you've kind of shown what you'll do in Season 1 and 2, right? You'll have 4 Dragonflight and 4 returning, maybe to bring back some old favorites.
Yes, I think we definitely have room to
Max,
revisit.
a few chatters expressed just how angry they are about Lower Kara here. Oh, I gotta see this. Looking for group Lower Kara, troll despair. Okay, wait, I'm just gonna play it and look at chat.
Maybe tweak or update or just revisit as they were if everyone loves them a dungeon later on in the season. I think Season 2 is almost certainly going to be the other 4 Dragonflight dungeons.
Dude, look at this guy said, high caliber question.
Are there legacy ones? But beyond that, I think one thing the structure does is also gives more room for us to potentially add all new dungeons over the course of an expansion.
Okay, the chat actually wasn't that popping. He's going to mention the Lower Kara thing in a second, so I might reopen it. But I'm kind of losing what he's actually saying. He has a very, very good fucking point about Legion here.
I think one thing the structure does is also gives more room for us to potentially add all new dungeons over the course of an expansion. Something we would like to get back to doing more of. I think back in Legion, when we last did this, one of the quick challenges that we ran into was integrating a brand new dungeon into a pool of dungeons that the community had already mastered. Mm-hmm. Like when Cathedral Mythic Plus rolled out.
Cathedral was, by the way, needed to be nerfed so many times. It actually was giga overtuned. So part of the issue with this was that Seat was initially overtuned and Cathedral was initially overtuned. However, both of those dungeons eventually made it to a point to where they were actually good. Like, I didn't do a lot of live keys, so my only impression was doing MDI stuff. Cathedral and Seat were 2 of my favorite dungeons. If you actually talk to a lot of Mythic Plus pushers from Legion, the ones that like actually did it and didn't just do it one time and leave, they said that like Seat was actually one of their favorite. Ben's favorite Legion dungeon is Seat of the Triumvirate. It left such a negative taste in people's mouths because the Mythic Plus pool was so big in Legion that every time you got another key, not only was it harder initially, but once it was nerfed to be in line, people still avoided it, and it wasn't because of the difficulty. It was just because it was new, and the other ones they already knew for 2 years. So it was an easier key to time, and people just had a worse opinion of it because of that. What he's saying is, he's basically announcing that they're going to make a lot more dungeons in this expansion. And the reason they haven't outside of the mega dungeons in BFA and Shadowlands is because they had a negative reaction from the community to adding singular dungeons in seasons. And the reason why is because there were so many in the Legion dungeon pool that the ones that they added weren't even bad dungeons, but they just were not liked because of that. But they're saying, hey, if we're rotating all the dungeons anyway, there's nothing stopping us from going back to just adding a bunch of dungeons into the expansion, which is honestly sick. Like, my only idea for Season 3 was they would bring some of the favorite Dragonflight ones back and do a mega dungeon and whatever, but like, dude, they can do all kinds of stuff. They can actually just create singular dungeons throughout the whole expansion now. Another important note about this is they hired Proletariat, or they got all of the people from Proletariat. Most of them are graphic people. A lot of them aren't going to be integrated until 11.0 because you're just integrating like a 100-person team into an already working team. It's pretty complicated. But one thing they do, and one of the limiting factors of creating dungeons in World of Warcraft is not creating boss mechanics or trash. It's actually the art. It's making the entire dungeon. That's really time consuming. And usually those artists are working on new zones like Zereth Mortis or stuff like that. With them having a lot more people working on art through Proletariat and potentially being involved before 11.0, I think that is more, all signs from what he said to that are pointing to the fact that they could be making just much more original dungeons throughout the expansion, which is actually really fun. This is such a good point.
That was a super dead key for a long time. Even more
Seat
so
as
with
well.
Seat of the Triumvirate.
Yeah.
Yep. And like, it wasn't actually like the challenge is, it wasn't that they were, in some cases they were actually harder, but like beyond that, it wasn't that they were that much harder. It's that you were comparing a dungeon the community had 1 week of knowledge of to a dungeon they had been running, for over a year, but treating them equally in terms of rewards, in terms of what challenge they were supposed to offer. When we have all new pools, that's not an issue anymore. So I think as we look towards the later seasons, if there's new dungeons introduced, that actually naturally goes there. We definitely can revisit any favorites from the first 8 while continuing to rotate through cool legacy dungeons.
Excellent. That is a perfect answer. And then also just a question about gear. So this gets brought up a lot, but I just kind of want to maybe phrase it in a little bit different way. So with Mythic Plus becoming more of an endgame avenue for people, is there a potential to add higher level loot acquisition for people who are doing top world level keys specifically? So like obviously raiding and PvP both get functionally higher eye level, but a lot of people exclusively Mythic Plus. Basically, is there a Mythic Plus key level that exists where it is kind of the same thing as killing maybe the last 2 bosses on Mythic, even though obviously you don't have to, find 20 people to raid with, open
Mm-hmm.
and
chat.
then one is spammable for loot, and one of them is a weekly lockout, all of that included. Just have you guys had any more thoughts on that?
I mean, I think there is a key level that exists. It's definitely a different key level for Lower Karazhan than Workshop, but that's one of the challenges too.
This hard
spammability
farmed
of it
Keck
definitely
W's
is a factor. That's something we've grappled with when it comes to Mythic Plus loot since its introduction back in Legion. Because of how varied dungeon pools are, because of just the social factors of, if someone's running a dungeon on a Saturday, we don't want people feeling like, well, I'm already locked for the week, or I've already maxed out on my loot for the week, so I don't want to run it with you. That's led us to every dungeon run gives you some loot, but of course, balancing that against weekly throttled systems like, just raids and PvP means that if it's too rewarding, we just completely killed raiding. And I would argue that
I mentioned this point after this, but you can already see, and that's just kind of an issue of where eye level drops for heroic in a way, because it's kind of complicated, right? Because like if you can get that much gear in Mythic Plus, you completely not trivialize heroic, but heroic becomes something you don't need to do at all. But I think it's okay that a Mythic Pluser wouldn't need to do heroic at all. But it becomes where raiders don't need to do heroic at all. So that's where it becomes kind of interesting. Like this. Having uncapped valor is a perfect example of this. Heroic raids have never mattered less. Outside of getting items that you want to upgrade with your mythic currency, heroic items have never been less relevant because you can just get 298 gear from Mythic Plus by farming 2s. And that's bad, right? Even though uncapped valor feels good, that part of it is bad from like Blizzard's perspective. It makes sense. But who knows?
One of the problems for not Mythic guilds so much, but normal and heroic guilds right now, is the tension between raid rewards and Mythic Plus rewards. If you're in a group progressing through heroic over the course of a season, but half of your raid is running 15s outside of raid time, you don't really need that raid loot anymore. And that increasingly causes division within the group, even between the people who are doing Mythic Plus and people who aren't. None of that is great. So anyway, all of that said, the direction I think we'd like to move in, though I don't have specific changes to announce, is on the one hand actually trying to, between tuning and rewards, bring that baseline down a little bit, or at least bring the baseline challenge up a little bit so that there's more of more parity between raid, dungeon, PvP rewards in that space. But at the same time, find ways to let Mythic Plus players reach the top of the mountain. Like whether it's, I don't know, whether there's some level that you clear in your Great Vault that lets you get Mythic end boss quality loot or whatever else. We'd like to make them truly equal in that sense, but there's some problems to solve along the way.
Yeah, definitely. There's also, I think this season kind of showcased what can happen to the heroic raid difficulty by having Mythic Plus available for, like, you uncapped Valor, for example, right? So if you just went hard enough and you farmed literally +2s and enough Valor, like anyone can do them, you can get full 298 gear and you will not want any single drop out of heroic basically except for the last boss. So there's a level there balancing to where like baseline Mythic Plus. Okay, I haven't thought about it like that before. Thank you.
But at the high end, like I think there's absolutely every bit as much skill that goes into pushing really, really high keys. We should be rewarding that equally. We just have to find a way to do it.
Cool. All right. Well, that's actually we blazed through basically all the main stuff I wanted to talk about. I do have a few more questions about like class trees and Dragonriding.
Sure.
So, with how fun and successful Dragonriding, for the few of us who've been able to actually try it yet, hopefully soon a lot more people get it in their hands. It is unbelievable. I think it like fully transcends flying. In fact, it's so good that I feel like it just flying normally just feels bad because of how good the system is. Are there any thoughts or plans in the future to allow Dragonriding in the open world, potentially some race content and old zones, stuff like that?
That's certainly one of those things we started talking about pretty quickly once initial alpha impressions came in. I mean, I think we built the system focused on Dragon
Oh, he said it. Oh,
Isles so that we really didn't have as many of the guardrails in designing it that we might have had if we were building it from day one as an evergreen game-wide system. A challenge here is also, not the specific mounts, the Dragon Ride we built to support Dragon Riding. We want to be very mindful of preserving players' investment and just the usefulness of the hundreds of mounts that many people have collected that they've spent years farming up. If suddenly those mounts are consigned to the dust heap because they can't do all the cool Dragon Riding stuff, that feels like a problem. All that said, when we introduce any one of these features, our hope is that it's awesome enough that people don't want to say goodbye to it, that we want to carry it forward, for the rest of the game's future. And so far, this is looking to be landing in that space. So we're very happy about that. Recognize that when Dragonflight is behind us, when we're leaving the Dragon Isles, people are not going to feel great about going back to their old,
Ooh, I would like to even see it before that. So there was actually a big question I wanted to ask him during this interview, and it was the only question that he basically came back and said, I'm not really going to be able to answer this. And it wasn't because he didn't want to answer it. It was just because let me see if I can find the question. So basically WoW has gone through a bunch of different eras. I think I won't waste time explaining the eras that have happened before Legion, but Legion through Shadowlands was absolutely the borrowed power era of World of Warcraft. Every expansion and patch introduced a new system that carried on to the end of the expansion, stopped, and then you had to start all over again. This made the beginning of expansions feel terrible, not only because you were losing a fully realized system that just got figured out, but also because it was going to take another year and a half for that to start working again. Guys, this is in the past. This is not a system madge moment. This has already happened. And then now in Dragonflight, clearly things are going in more of an evergreen thing. Everything announced at the beginning of this expansion, there's much less stuff they're trying to do rocket science to figure out how to balance it. They're doing things that are going to sustain through the rest of the game. But evergreen means something that isn't going to have borrowed power. So something that really isn't an option for that is let's say 10.2 comes around. They're not going to give you 5 extra points on your spec tree, because that's literally what they're removing, right? That's how your class feels like shit when you just get that removed next expansion. So basically my question was this: what does the player have to look forward to every patch starting in 10.1? More of a focus on horizontal additions, new zones like Korthia and Zereth Mortis? What kind of content is there going to be now that there isn't going to be corruption and essences and the Crucible system and just every system that got really, I'm sorry, I know I'm saying it, but like everything that got released previously, what is there to actually look forward to in a patch? And basically they said, we can't really answer this because we're not going to announce what we're doing in 10.1 and 10.2, which, I mean, right, they're not just going to announce right now what they're doing in those patches. But it does beg the question of what do you guys have any idea what we're going to look forward to? New raid, new Mythic Plus season, new PvP, whatever. That's baseline. Got it. All right. What else? What are we looking for that? Right? That's the thing that I feel like is that is the biggest question coming into next expansion of we know what patches have looked like for the last 6 years. Now they are obviously going to be different. I just wonder what it's going to be. Hopefully it's horizontal content. Hopefully it's cool stuff like Mage Tower and just things along that line that, if they have the time to focus on it and it's not player power based and it's just for fun, they could make a lot of cool shit, and they're going to obviously have way more time to do that because they're not making these. So, yeah, it could be fun. Who knows? That's what I wanted to ask him, but I couldn't.
Floating at a static speed.
Oh, and the reason I started talking about all this in general is I think Dragonriding into the open world, they might bring it back and a thing. Maybe in 10.1, one major point of content is they take the Eastern Kingdoms and they make 100 Dragonriding races across all of Eastern Kingdoms. That would be fucking dope. That would be so cool. And then instead of waiting till the next expansion, They could do like Kalimdor 1 patch, Eastern Kingdoms 1 patch, Mist of Pandaria 1 patch. It's just like free content. It's a lot of work. You know, like that's an easy idea, right? That's kind of what I wanted to ask him, but I didn't end up getting to do it.
And so we want to have a solution when we get there.
All right, cool. Let's see. I have 2 other ones. I'm trying to like kind of combine them maybe to come up with something that is a little better. So, here's when I hard YOLO'd the class feedback. I was not planning on asking this. I hope I phrased it well. I don't even remember what I said. So far, the class trees have been excellent. You know, the best ones give you things you haven't had before. They give you choice. You know, being able, maybe not even adding things you're getting, but necessarily just dropping things you don't maybe need for a specific encounter to give you a passive or another thing that will make you more powerful in what you're doing. This has been achieved through most of the specs in the game, but the feedback has been a little varied. So we've had, you know, some specs get feedback every Friday for this entire patch so far with great changes. There's been other classes that didn't have posts for a month, but then just got this massive dump of information that was clearly being worked on the whole time. With excellent changes, speaking about DK specifically. And then some other classes have had less updates. Basically, just asking, like, can there be a more standardized level of feedback between all the classes? And how has that been going for you guys?
Yeah, druids and priests.
I feel like I brought up that question without being disrespectful. I think I did okay. I fucking YOLO'd all of that. But I think that worked, and I didn't sound like an asshole saying that druids and priests. Yeah, okay, that's fine. A more standardized level of feedback between all the classes, and how has that been going for you guys?
Yeah, druids and priests. We hear you. We're gonna have information soon. Apologies for the silence.
Another power word update.
You deserve better, and you rightly expect better. Ideally, yes, we would have had, you know, just more even-handed communication.
I'm very surprised he actually specifically mentioned Druid and Priest, by the way. Like, you guys remember, like, I sent him my questions? I did not send him this. I didn't have to send him all my questions, but, like, I just so he could get information on it. I feel like if I would have sent him this question, he would have maybe like, researched and figured out which classes wanted it more, but I guess it's kind of hard to ignore it.
Across the board, the challenge is, it's, you know, I know billion-dollar company and all, but at the end of the day, it's also a number of humans who can all just fit in one room together who are handling both.
I say this every day. A lot of people are disconnected with what he's talking about right now.
The class design side of it and the community communication side of it. And life happens that results in, you know, gaps along the way. Sometimes one developer is working on a couple of classes and has one done, but they need to get the other one done because understandably players of that class are impatient, but that means in turn that they're less focused on the first one for now and are going to get back to it. And so it's stuff like that. I know sometimes it can be helpful just to hear from us that, you know, we don't have anything right now. We're working on it. We're going to have news for you in a couple of weeks, as opposed to just radio silence. And I think we all need to collectively work to get better at ever having the radio silence situation going on when people are just waiting for news.
Excellent. Okay, and I think I have time for one more question. I don't even remember asking another question. What the fuck did I talk about? What the fuck did I ask? So, first of all, that's excellent, and I just actually I don't even know if I need to enter the question. Oh, yeah, that's why. I was gonna dude, honestly, I have no idea what I was about to say. There's a good reason I backed off of it. That could have been rough. I asked literally everything I wanted to. Excellent. Okay, and I think I have time for one more question. So, first of all, that's excellent, and I just actually I don't even know if I need to enter the question. The question isn't even that good. I just want to point out that you guys have the right idea with class trees. The ones being done at their this is true best, and you've seen over time the ones that were a bit more problematic have obviously been a deep amount of collaboration there, and they have seen the things that have worked in other trees and moved on to others. So far, I think the fact that some of them at their very best show an unbelievable form of content, I think all of us are just really happy to see it, and just hope that all the classes kind of end up turning around with the same, because I know it's good. It's gonna be a long road, right? Because you're just now, it seems, with posts, you're getting into the tuning section, right? Where, like, now that you've added a bunch of new capstones, you're going to need to make sure that they all kind of make sense. Some of them weren't capstone nodes before. They need to really compete with each other. So you guys ready to just talk about that process?
Yeah, tuning and iteration, right? I mean, and that's going to mean replacing some talents, redesigning some things that just aren't working. But we obviously need to get the broad foundations out there. Looking forward to raid testing, Mythic Plus, endgames, seeing people actually using these builds in different situations, and moving beyond theory crafting to
That was
playing with
I
them.
dropped my phone
And
falls out of my
that's
pocket when
the
I lean
only
back
thing
like
that's
this.
ahead of us. And frankly, that's actually a little bit of a relief. Like at this point in
Oh, this is
Shadow,
okay. I shouldn't interrupt you here.
designing some things that just aren't working. But we obviously needed to get the broad foundations out there. Looking forward to raid testing, Mythic Plus, endgames, seeing people actually using these builds in different situations, and moving beyond theory crafting to playing with them. And that's the only thing that's ahead of us. And frankly, that's actually a little bit of a relief. Like at this point in Shadowlands, we still had 4 different systems to implement. It was like, cool, we got these things done. Now let's finish making conduits and Torghast powers. Here, okay, we have our first pass the talent trees done.
Yep. Class devs at this point are just like, class designers are just like, all right, we're just going to spend the rest of our time before Dragonflight just making sure these classes make the most sense. And last expansion, they were just like, holy fuck, I need to make like 15 new Torghast powers and make sure all my conduits and soulbinds make sense for my specific spec. And by the way, I also need to balance 4 different new covenants, which people have to select, and they cannot unselect it for 2 weeks, so it has to be perfect. And also, like, you know what I mean? Like I have a lot of confidence that they'll get it right, or as close to right as something as complicated as WoW can be, because it's kind of the only thing on their plate.
100% of the team's time is going to be focused on listening, responding, iterating, and then tuning.
All right, excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time.
I have one super quick question for you. Just wanted to see this as a question.
Oh, so he like wanted to bring this up the whole time. I bet he was gonna like. I bet he was maybe expecting me to ask way more stuff about raid. The thing is I wasn't. I'm not gonna ask questions that I already know the answer to. I had a very limited amount of time, and I feel like almost every question I asked and everything he answered was new information, and a lot of it was really fucking interesting. But I wasn't going to ask him about global release. They've answered that 100 times. Their answer has never changed. Oh, wait, look at my face. I'm like starting to pog. You know, just stuff like that. I'm not like, there's no reason I'm going to do that. So he's, oh yeah, dude, I look like, okay, I need to read the chat during this too, though. I need to read chat.
For you, for the community.
Okay. Wait, why am I so excited?
How do you guys listening, responding, iterating, and then tuning?
All right, excellent. Thank you. My
you so
dog is licking its butt just on stream. But that's fine. For your time,
I have one super quick question for you. Just wanted to see this as a question for you, for the community.
Okay.
How do you guys feel about simultaneous normal, heroic, mythic release as a thing in, let's say, hypothetical future tiers?
I think, for me personally, I think, okay, so I haven't had any time to think about this, but something that I think is an issue is like, one thing you guys have done some things to mitigate in the past is you've like had to reduce what crazy things we would do during heroic when like Mythic first comes out. But the reality is that's because we have an entire week to do degenerate things. If Mythic is out, that really solves a lot of the decision making. You'd be doing a lot of things when Mythic is out, but you'd still do a lot of work in that week, and it would kind of make the beginning of Mythic. Oh, man, I still haven't had a lot of time to just brainstorm this with a bunch of people, but I think like the first 2 days of Mythic are still going to be very heroic splitty, but it's just going to be a week earlier, and it's, yeah. Dude, he actually fried my brain. I didn't even think that was like a possibility. So wait, I'm so confused. Like how does that actually work? Like if they release Mythic right away, are we just doing heroic splits anyway, or do they have to reduce the difficulty of Mythic? Or dude, I actually don't even like. I don't even. There's so that like that like whole thing is a kind of a bombshell, honestly. Like I think in general it sounds really good. I just haven't really thought, dude. Yeah, I've never been that stun locked in my life. I was like, if you guys know me and watch my stream, you can probably tell that my mind was just like racing in a million directions at that moment. But yeah, I actually had no idea how to respond. I didn't want to say like, oh my god, that's great, and then I would think about it more and be like, wait, this is actually like really bad. Raid comes out and it's heroic, normal, and mythic all at once. We don't even know if they're going to be testing it. That still hasn't been announced yet. And then do you just go, you kill, how do you kill Mythic bot? Wait, does this kill mirrors? Oh wait, I think this kills buckets. Wait, are buckets dead if Mythic comes out on day 1? Buckets are like secondary characters that you have. Like if our DH player Shakib plays like Demon Hunter, he would have like 5 Demon Hunters to see who got the most tier. And those other 4 Demon Hunters are his buckets. They're not his main. They're like just extra characters he has just to get tier. But like you wouldn't have time to do that. You wouldn't have time to do that if Mythic came out at the same time as Heroic. I mean, that is a massive source of information. I don't know. That's very overwhelming. I would need to figure that out.
Yeah,
but
no.
Chat
and to
is
be
pogging.
clear, I'm super not, and I'm not.
Chat is universally pogging. Like, there's not a single no here. Okay, someone said not good for 2-day guilds. It is zero sum. Nothing changes for 2-day guilds.
Genuinely not announcing
no,
anything there.
Yeah.
We're just trying to figure out, I mean, there's holidays coming up. There's stuff going on. We want to think through how our raid rollout is going to work for the start of Dragonflight, and community feedback always helps.
I think it'd be, I'm not positive, but I think it would be worth a shot, especially with, like the potential timing. So yeah. Okay, I was about to talk about the leaked release date, and that would have been really fucking stupid. So I said the potential timing. And the potential timing does not need any knowledge of the release date. It's kind of logical that the expansion is going to come out late November, early December, regardless of any leaks. I mean, that's just, like, that's the only time it can really make sense. And then it was also leaked. So, okay, I don't think he'd be mad about that.
Community
feedback. Oh, he said
always
holiday
helps.
Himself. I think it'd be...
Wait,
let me listen again. To figure that out.
Yeah,
but
no.
Chat
and to
is
be clear, I'm super not, and I'm not genuinely not announcing anything there.
Yeah.
We're just trying to figure out, I mean, there's holidays coming up. There's stuff going on. We want to think through how our raid rollout is going to work for the start of Dragon.
Oh, so he's specifically mentioning this because, like, if you do a normal raid release schedule, so if I go to time and date, is it .com? timeanddate.com? Did I just nail this? Insane gaming right there. So I think the leaked release date was the 29th of November. Was that the 28th on the Monday? Okay, so the 28th, sure. So releases on the 28th, and then now you do a normal 1 week and then 2 weeks, and I believe it's 2 weeks later Heroic comes out, and then 1 week later Mythic comes out normally, which means that Mythic, like 5 days in, would be going through Christmas, virtually guaranteeing everyone else would be doing it. But if they release it at the same time, that means 28 comes out, 6 comes out, 13 comes out, Heroic and Mythic are both released. They usually give 2 weeks at the beginning of the expansion before raids come out. Heroic and Mythic are both released, and then you now have 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 days before Christmas. So we have the opportunity to save Christmas yet again, just like Nathri if they do that. That would solve it for us, but also it doesn't... The whole conversation about, like, raiding over Christmas, we've had this conversation before. It's just for a couple of guilds that will kill us. Like, there's probably... I'm just going to make this up. How many days is this? 12 days? I bet there will be less than 4 guilds in the world that kill the first raid in that amount of time, especially if you have to spend a good bit of the first week doing heroic stuff. So you're only really solving it for 5 guilds, which are a couple guilds, and then everyone else still has to raid over Christmas. But again, I think this is just not a big deal. Every single year for the last 10 years, guilds have raided over Christmas. The only 2 weeks that, as soon as your argument understands that you're not specifically complaining about the race world first, you're complaining about everyone else, you have to understand that 90% of the people who raid every patch are still progressing over Christmas in, like, every raid for the past 10 years. So if you're making the argument for them, they're already doing it. So it's just not something Blizzard can really do. The only time Blizzard can ever release an expansion and have a raid not happen over Christmas is if they release the expansion over Christmas. And then the other argument you're doing is you're saying, well, it feels bad for Blizzard devs because they have to, like, work over the holidays. A lot of industries have to work over the holidays, man. And you're also making a case for people that you don't even know want to be made for it. You don't know if Blizzard devs are just like, dude, I fucking hate this. Dude, maybe they're swimming in overtime. Maybe they saw their family on Thanksgiving and aren't going to necessarily see them for Christmas. You don't even know their actual opinion on it, right? Even though it could obviously be bad, and sometimes people don't want to. Maybe they're not religious. Maybe they don't celebrate Christmas. Like yeah, they're on Christmas break, but like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, there's a lot of weak arguments for being mad about this. It's just not a big deal. But either way, and it affects every guild equally. You know, people are just going to take that week off or take a couple raids off around Christmas. Finishing the interview though.
Dragonflight, and community feedback always helps.
I think it'd be, I'm not positive, but I think it would be worth a shot, especially with, you know, like the potential timing. So yeah, I think I'm it's so much at once, but I'm almost positive that it's a good thing. But I would need to, like, wait. So they're trying to avoid stalling content. Yeah, I mean, I guess the alternative, looking at time and date, This is what some people have said, and they were 100% serious. Okay, release the expansion on November 28th, but wait to release raids until January 3rd. Yeah. Just release your expansion, but instead of releasing content, just don't for an entire month. Yeah, just, yeah, woo. Like, actually sit down and actually think about it. So, yeah, thank you for that. That was very cool. And thank you so much for the answers. That was deeply insightful. I love hearing you talk about WoW. I'm very passionate about it, and very clearly you are too. So thank you for that. Oh, you guys got ads right here. Get fucking dunked. Get dunked, ad watchers.
Yeah, thank you very much, and look forward to doing it again.
All right, thanks, man. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Yep. All right. I like it. I'm very happy with how that went.